So good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone, wherever you might be in the world at this moment. Welcome to RAYfest, our online festival celebrating women of spirit. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm your host, Fatima Ashraf, and together with Saima Daya, we are the co-creators of Ray of God. Ray seeks to share feminine spiritual wisdom to help realize God in all ways and to align with justice, truth, and beauty. The energetic state of the feminine is our guiding principle and holds our intention. And we believe that all genders hold the feminine and masculine within themselves. While we are women-led and women-centered, we welcome and encourage all genders to join us in helping to create safer, inclusive spaces. Ray does not seek to present a voice of expertise. We see ourselves as travelers along the way and learning, God willing, with each step. Our ideas are constantly evolving, and we hope you will join us on this journey to deeper consciousness. The aim of the festival is to rise, vocalize, and deepen. And our contributors have been speaking to the broad theme of her voice. How to connect to and speak from our own truth. How can we begin to heal our relationship with self, other, and the divine through this? We are blessed to be welcoming and have been welcoming over the course of this weekend a diverse array of intergenerational, interspiritual contributors, religious leaders, spiritual teachers, activists, academics, creatives, and so much more. This weekend leads into All Hallows Eve or All Saints Eve and Samhain, that midway point between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice. This is a time to honor the saints, and we hold in our awareness that there will be many around the world in ceremony and prayer at the same time that this festival is unfolding. The music for the festival, including that between sessions and the playlist we shared at the end of yesterday, have been specially curated by our friend Layla Bahrainian in honor of our Iranian sisters. In this morning's heart-to-heart conversation, we will be asking our contributors to speak to the theme, and we welcome your questions to be submitted through the chat function to the host. Feel free to ask whatever questions come to your heart, just being mindful that our contributors are also on a journey like each of us and deserve our love and respect in being willing to share from their hearts in such an open forum. And before I introduce our guests, I just wanted to share that before our first panel yesterday, we were having a little conversation with Leila Yagiela and with the Reverend Rachel Mann, and we ended up in a little bit of a conversation about maypole dancing, as you do just before a panel conversation on her voice. And I won't quite tell you how we led into that, but it was quite playful, as both Reverend Rachel and Layla are. And so maypole dancing, as many of you will know, falls into it's a traditional European sort of folk tradition, and it's not quite clear when it exactly originated, but it involves the erection of a very tall wooden pole, several meters high, and from its top there are these ribbons that are flowing down. And what happens is usually on the 1st of May or in midsummer, depending where you are, and what the tradition is of that locality, the men and women in pairs would hold on to the ends of these ribbons, and they would weave in opposite directions and weave a pattern that would then be formed over the pole. And there are many more intricate and complex ways of dancing on the ground, so that a more intricate weave is created on the pole. And of course, I said to Rachel that, oh my gosh, I'm stealing this. This is the great metaphor for all manner of things. But as I was reflecting back on the conversations of yesterday, this morning, I was thinking to myself, that each of our women, and of course we have only women speakers, but each of our women is bringing a very distinct flavor and thread of experiences. And that, God willing, over the course of this weekend, half of this pole is already weaved, and the rest will be weaved. And perhaps when we reflect back at the end of today and in the days to come, we will kind of reflect back on the wonderful pattern that has been created. And it also reflects conversations that we were having yesterday about diversity and plurality that is contained within both the Trinitarian Godhead, but also within the Islamic tradition, and the idea of the 99 names that are encapsulated within Allah. And so all of that really just for me this morning, and I just wish to share that with you as something for us to kind of look forward to at the end of our time together, and just really conscious and aware that each individual is bringing something quite distinct and quite beautiful. So to introduce our two ribbons this morning, we begin with Dr. Amina Wadud, who is a world-renowned scholar and activist with a focus on Islam, justice, gender, and sexuality. After achieving full professor, she retired from US academia, except as visiting researcher to Starr King School for the Ministry, California, USA. But she has recently returned to academia as visiting professor to the National Islamic University of Jogjakarta, I hope I've said that right, Indonesia. She has written a number of significant scholarly texts, including Qur'an and Woman, Rereading the Sacred Text from a Woman's Perspective, a classic that helped towards the development of epistemology and methodology in Islamic feminism, which is the most dynamic aspect of Islamic reform today. It is 3 decades old and translated over 10 times. After completing a 3-year research grant investigating 500 years of Islamic classical discourse on sexual diversity and human dignity, funded by the Arcus Foundation, Amina is organizing an international center for queer Islamic studies and theology, the acronym of which is QIST, QIST, the first of its kind in the world. Mother of 5 and nana to 6, she is best known as the Lady Imam, and you can get her full bio at therayofgod.com. And it's a pleasure to introduce our other ribbon. The Reverend Marie Elsa Bragg has been a spiritual director for over 20 years and is the current chaplain to the Speaker of the House of Commons. Her work is with people from different walks of life, traditions, religions, and experiences of faith, whilst also dedicating part of her work to those in religious orders such as monastic orders, clergy, and the Padre of the Royal Navy. She also lectures on subjects around theology, religion, tradition, ritual, interfaith, and spirituality. Her personal spirituality includes a continual interest in different traditions alongside a lifelong connection with Senang, again, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, the Cistercian monastery local to her family in Provence, and with the local Christianity and literary tradition of the Lake District. She's also training to be a Jungian analyst and has authored 2 books, Towards Melbreak and Sleeping Letters. So it's my great pleasure to welcome these 2 wonderful women who have been with us in different ways throughout this journey. Amina and Marie Elsa were both with us at our first festival, and continue our friends and supporters to Saima and I in different ways, actually. So our journey with them continues both through the festival, through the work of Ray, because Marie Elsa has offered moon meditations with us, and indeed we dreamed up the moon meditations with Marie Elsa at the end of the first that first festival back in 2020. And it was a real joy to experience those with her, and I know friends will have joined for some of that. And also just in my own personal reveries and discoveries through life, Marie Elsa has been a companion. And Amina Jan also for many, many years has been a figure for admiration and respect, and also a companion along the way. And I know that Saima Jan and Amina Jan have been spending some time together too, sort of deepening in scholarly understanding and spiritual togetherness. So really such a joy to have you both. And now that my joyful gushing a little bit, which I'm trying to contain, is subsiding slightly, I will begin with a question, and we'll start with Amina. And the same question for both of you. So I really wanted to begin with a consideration of her voice with a capital H, i.e. the divine feminine voice. How has the divine feminine voice shown itself in your life? And how do you call out to her?
Thank you so much, and also thank you again for inviting me to return. I begin, as I always begin, in the name of Allah, whose grace I seek in this and all other matters. I ask Allah's forgiveness for the frailty of being human and any errors that I might make. You know, as a student, I followed my heart into the study of the Quran because I just had this love affair with the Quran. So I just wanted to remove all the barriers between myself and the Quran. And over the course of the master's and the PhD, I came to learn, I think unintentionally, maybe tangentially, that we have no written record of women's responses to the sacred text, although we have volumes and volumes of men's exegesis. And I thought to myself, we might be missing part of the story. And that interest in discourse about the discourse of the Quran led me into the divine feminine, and which I would assert, even back then, that Allah speaks in the feminine voice. And I have worked to evolve that because we have this notion of, you know, the one God with 99 names, and those 99 names are both Jalal, masculine, and Jamal, feminine. But of course, we've had these cultures that are super entrenched in the masculinity of God and in the male voice, and as a result, privileging, you know, men's ways of knowing, men's ways of striving for faith, you know, etc. And so altogether, the female voice, you know, has been eclipsed and sometimes intentionally silenced. And so trying to listen for the still small voice of the sacred in its feminine ways has indeed been difficult. And I finally came to accept that probably one of the ways that it would be, I think, useful for me to understand it, to unveil it, and also to be able to hear it clearly is to affirm women's experiences with the sacred, so that Allah's feminine voice becomes dialogical. It is part of our own self-unfolding, the affirmation, excuse me, that we are all mirrors of Allah, we are all mirrors of the sacred, and to allow for that dialogical part to open up the space where we capture our own voice. And in capturing our own voice and affirming our own experiences, then we understand that we have those experiences at one with Allah. And so in a way, we kind of make the sound, of the voice, by our own yearnings, by our joys, by our labor pains, just to, again, raised in a tradition with this emphasis on maleness, male God, male, voices, male authority, male privilege. I'm trying to say that I had difficulty hearing the voice. And then I had to think of ways, to sort of give it space, including in terms of, like silent listening. And one of the ways that it came true for me is this affirmation of our experiences of at-one-ment, and therefore the validation of female experiences. And then that tajalli, they call it, it's an emanation, it's a ray, RAYfest. It's a ray from Allah, it's a tajalli. And that tajalli brought me back to the sacred. So in that way, I think I at least came to, get a feel for it, because, I feel like I was denied it for so long that I didn't know how to hear the voice. And I didn't know how to call out to it, except maybe calling out to my own mother. So that's kind of how it started. I'm still in the process, I admit.
Thank you, Amina Jan. Yeah. Marie Elsa, the same from you.
That was beautiful, thank you. It's lovely to be here, and especially to sort of, for a moment, honour the women who are rising in Iran, feeling very much with them in our meeting here. It's lovely to hear you describe the idea of unveiling, Amina. I think that's a very beautiful image, and for some reason that for me has joined with the beautiful feeling of the ocean in our opening meditation. Because I was just remembering that the Hebrew root of Eve is the breath of life, the source of life and the breath of life. And I think for me, there's, on my personal journey, there's a continual unveiling of this holistic breath of life that is very much in nature, in the body, but also on all levels. But I do feel that being in a body and incarnate brings the kind of holistic feminine breath of God into sort of everything that I do. If I can, through my life, allow myself to receive the unveiling of it as life goes on and the kind of workshop of life progresses. For me, I think also, I feel like I was born into a very patriarchal society, as many of us were, and so I feel that I've had to find the invisible parts and the silence. But by silence, I don't mean that beautiful, full, pregnant silence. I mean the emptied silence, the muted silence, and find it within myself and slowly wake up to how much I'm colluding. And that's an ongoing process, and I'm sure will be a lifetime. But I feel that I've slowly allowed to even see my name. It's interesting, when we were in the green room, that Fatima mentioned my name, because actually living with my name has been quite a big part of my journey, because Marie and Elsa are very, with a hyphen in the middle, are very much the meeting of Mary and Elizabeth, both pregnant with Christ and the Baptist in their wombs. And so there's something about pregnancy of the divine, and that their bodies are holding God within them, this sort of gestative part. There's something about the womb of God that has been very, very central in my lens, I would say, of questioning or listening, questioning and listening, really. But I think in the last few months, well, one of the big things that has affected me, and certainly the people I've been working with and the groups I've been running, the mystical groups I've been running, was obviously the death of Queen Elizabeth in the UK. And that's brought a really extraordinary journey of feminine sovereignty. And looking at that for all of us, men and women, and saying, what is your inner sovereign really like? Have you integrated the femininity of your sovereignty? Do you feel that it's all right to have your own inner sovereignty? Because of course, the external sovereign, queen, king, holds that position for all of us to show that it's within all of us. And so, and that, the idea of inner sovereignty, and it held in a looking at the feminine of sovereignty, has brought me into a really interesting and beginning exploration of the concept of the throne as a womb, as a holding space, as a God-given container for us for creation to even begin and be outpoured onto. And I think of all the icons with Mary or Jesus or sitting on the throne, and I feel that the throne is something that is a sort of bridge between this fullness before creation and this beginning, this gift of creation. So that's something that's really affecting me at the moment.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Marie Elsa. And of course, immediately as you mention this this idea of the womb and the throne, or the throne as womb, this really resonates with the Islamic tradition hugely. And yesterday I shared the throne verses from the Quran, and actually just the sense of empowerment I feel when I recite some of those lines, which, and even though that majesty belongs to God ultimately, and I'm just a mere reflection or receptacle, depending on how we look at it, but just this sense that, the words are something like this in English, that her throne, extends over the heavens and the earth, and and nothing can happen that she is not aware of, or that she is not in control of. And there is, I feel in myself, as I recite those words, something really, just something shifting in me. And I know that that was part of the reason why I chose to recite that yesterday, was because I was in need of that sense of my own sovereignty, as you say. And I am grateful for your sharing, because it also helps me to connect, what sometimes unconsciously we're doing, or part consciously, not even quite aware of what gifts might come just from the recitation, and that journey with recitation. Amina Jan spoke about this, love affair with the Quran, and for me also, it is an ongoing journey, because my journey with the Quran started as a relationship of trepidation. I was worried about what the Quran was telling me I could not do. And actually what has ensued and what has followed is really, and I know this nodding heads there, because, I think for many of us growing up in the Islamic tradition, and particularly perhaps, in Britain, I can resonate, I can speak more of that because that's my experience, is this sense of, growing up with a religion of do's and don'ts, and often because our parents didn't have that knowledge to be able to bring out more of it for us, or that they were in the struggles of daily life and not being able to bring out that mystical bridal, unveiling, that is needed to really to unveil ourselves, as well as, unveiling the Quran, and then really meeting, inshallah, God willing, one day face to face, but whatever that might be. But Amina Jan, I also want to invite you to respond to Marie Elsa if you wish, before I ask the next question. Is there anything you'd like to say
yes, I have two things that I like to say, and one is based on what you just said. So I'm going to kind of go backwards because my memory is at that age where I may not remember. But I remember exactly when I started using the pronoun she for the sacred, especially in the context of, all the sort of patriarchal, male-oriented perspectives, on the law that I had gleaned and understood and, participated in. I was teaching a class that the full title of it was Global Classics in Spirituality. But the student catalog couldn't contain all those words. And so it got shortened to Global Classics of Spirit, which I just thought was perfect. But the first semester that I was teaching it, which means that I was in that process of, trying to be a receptacle to the best way to share the idea that within, our human experiences are these amazing expressions and articulations of the sacred and of experiences with the sacred. And it was my intention with the course to kind of, sort of dot into as many of these as possible. And at the same time, kind of direct them with some other, you could kind of say more academic or secular kind of, ways to help to open up in the reading of it, including the fact that they were supposed to keep a weekly journal. And so they were supposed to respond to everything that they read. And I remember we came to this discussion, which was just, it was, sometimes you have those rare moments where, you and your students really are deeply aligned in the unfolding of, the teaching experience. And I remember when we had this conversation about using the she pronoun, I had been doing it, but I had kind of been doing it, I want to say, in an academic way. In other words, I was making an effort, just as people had done in their academic writings, to change their pronouns, in such a way as to stop always assuming that the male, number one, is generic, but number two, that the male is the universal model. And so I started to reflect on this, Jamal and Jalal, feminine and masculine aspects of Allah, the yin and the yang. And I recognize, and this is what I've been saying to people now for about 20 years, that it's just a pronoun. And if it is just a pronoun, then the masculine pronoun he is not literal, and therefore it should be just as easy to use the feminine pronoun she, because they're just pronouns. And we had, as I said, we reached this nice place with the students, and the male students in the class really opened up in our conversation about how transformative it was for them, because they also saw that they did align with the privilege of having, the ultimate reality or God being identified as the same pronoun as they carry. And that really led me to know that I'm not just doing this because I know I've experienced silencing as a woman, And I know that I'm still in search of the divine feminine, and I'm still trying to find ways that I can, open up to its reality. But I had to push so much to get myself in the comfort zone of using she, that witnessing students who were able to say, even when I am a he, because no one identified as non-binary in that class, even in terms of the he, that there is in fact a disproportionate kind of privileging that goes with only identifying the sacred with a feminine pronoun. So I keep playing with it, and of course I always get the pushback because the Arabic language is very gendered binary. Everything, like every word in Arabic is going to be masculine, feminine, except for 3 of them, like the word who, the word as in the inquiry, who is it, man, and then kullam, like all, all tables, all chairs. But if you say tables and you say chairs, these have to have gender markers on it. And so people push back because they say, well, Allah is never referred to as hiya in Arabic. Except of course there are also like azat al-Qudusiyya, the sacred essence, which is in fact feminine, but they push back because they actually don't want to relinquish the privilege. Well, I live in Indonesia right now, and Indonesia has only one pronoun. There are several languages that are like this, and my friends, even like university students, even in the context of the classes, they will consistently use both pronouns when they're making a sentence about a person because they're not used to having to choose. So they'll start off by, my mother was cooking breakfast today, and then he went into the living room, and my father, she. They will do that all the time. And because I know that it's a question like language learning and the necessity to choose one or the other when they don't have it in their own language, I began to understand that there is even more significance when we learn to overcome what has been our resistance to referring to the sacred by using she. Because what it is saying is that we are, in fact, at a certain level, internalizing the male God and comfortable with that, but we're not as comfortable with the female or the feminine of God. So how are we going to, uncover that or listen to that, voice if, we're struggling with it? And as I say, I'm still in the process. So, I need to be honest that I'm still working out things. But I think in some ways, entering into a culture with a language where people will consistently refer, just to mere human beings who don't identify as non-binary, that they will consistently go back and forth between the she and the he. It kind of reminded me that struggling to do this, in the last, 2 decades, and then working at it with students, and particularly listening to the male students saying what a difference it made for them to, refer to the sacred using she. It's a process. It's a process of unfolding. And when we started off, thinking about voice, in some ways, what we hear of God's voice is what we take away, and also what we put into what is our relationship with the divine. And that kind of gets me to the thing I thought about when Marie Elsa was speaking also about the womb. Probably one of the root forms that is used most frequently in the Qur'an comes from the word womb, rahim in Arabic, ra, ha, mim, or R-H-M. It is the root form of the opening of every 113 of the 114 chapters of Rahman Rahim, most gracious, most merciful. It is also the mandate, of the Prophet. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاهُ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. He was not sent except as a mercy to all the worlds. And we are supposed to be merciful between each other. رُحِمَ بَيْنَهُمْ. So this central theme around the womb is actually capturing that Allah or God is the womb, and we are all born through the mercy that extends from, that sacred creator. But because we are in bodies, we all have bodies, right? There has to be this sort of transmutation, very similar to certain ideas that go with how we understand incarnation. There has to be this sort of transmutation between, the sacred ultimate, which is both form and formless, and then us, when we take on three-dimensional forms. And to me, the vehicle of that transformation is the womb. And in Islamic, creation, we have this notion of the divine breath and nafs ar-Rahman. Again, there's that Rahman that, from the same root word, and that breath is blown into each of us. And if you've ever seen a child when it's born and it takes its first breath, or I have a grandson, when he was born, he did not breathe. And the midwife was cradling him, and she put her mouth over his nose and mouth and, just gently blew in until he took his first breath. So she was the vehicle of the divine breath. I mean, it's such an amazing thing to see, having seen my children born and everybody breathed, and then lots of my grandchildren born and everybody breathed, but then Bashir was born and he didn't breathe. And he, as a matter of fact, had some problem. They couldn't quite capture what it was, but he would stop breathing and he would turn blue. And my daughter, his mother, had to repeat that exercise that the midwife did and breathe into him in the back of the car as they would take him to the hospital. He spent a lot of his first 3 months, back and forth to the hospital till he had open heart surgery, which is an interesting story in itself because there was nothing wrong with his heart. But that was to alleviate what was happening when the aorta was pressing on, the windpipe here, and it would press so hard when he would cry that it would shut it down, so he would stop breathing and he would turn blue. And sometimes I just think how amazing it was that my daughter had the wherewithal to simply repeat this breathing into this child as they are on their way to the emergency with it, because I mean, even when I think about it now, I just found it astounding, So if I'm so impressed with that in the 3D form of it, the whole idea that we each carry that breath of God who created us through that reality of the womb, which is in fact God itself, that God, we're created in God's womb, we're given the breath, and then we go out into the world and stand up as, men, women, and non-binary. So I loved the way, that you talk about the womb, that sort of sacred womb in the persons of Mary and Elizabeth, because in a way, it's like a replication, of another idea that we have with regard to God being the womb through this central word that goes throughout the Qur'an and Islamic traditions. I don't know what you think about that. What do you think?
Well, I mean, there's so much there. It's so rich what you've been saying. I mean, the breath of life is. I'm very, very touched by your story about your grandson and the idea, and there's something also profound in that. I mean, because we do give each other the breath of life. And that's something that builds community, and actually if we were more aware that we actually all share the breath of God, I think the world would be quite a different place. So I think that there's something, I'm just so touched by that story. Thank you. But I'm also thinking about what you were saying about language. I mean, I'm in France at the moment, and I'm half French, and we have masculine and feminine objects. So there's always been a what's masculine and what feminine for me being brought up. But I'd like to add to, because what you're saying I just totally agree with, but if I add that a big part has been, like I'm sure for you, I know for you, has been trying to reclaim the stories of women, because they've been sort of hidden, and some hidden in plain sight. Yesterday morning I did a Thoughtful Day on Radio 4, and I mentioned once again that Mary Magdalene had been sort of hidden in plain sight by Pope Gregory I, dismissing her as a sort of redeemed prostitute, which wasn't really necessarily right in the Bible at all. And now she's seen as the disciple of the disciples. But there's a big part of my life that's been really admiring and being so grateful for women who've been reclaiming the women of the Bible, or women, women's writings at all. And then the other thing I'd like to add is that, I mean, for me, I'm just beginning to reclaim liturgical language in the church and try and find a way that's both masculine and feminine, because this unveiling that we've been talking about so beautifully is really that sort of divine marriage, isn't it? And the divine marriage, the more you really unveil everything, you have the marriage of the masculine and the feminine and beyond, into the plural and then into the fullness of everything. So there's this kind of continual unveiling of what's really happening. And with that, I'm doing a really interesting project at the moment on the idea of QIST, a female Christ. And it really comes from the tradition which started in the 70s of liberation theology in Christianity, where not only did we kind of get the very useful focus back on an inclusive teaching, including women, slaves, tax collectors, poor, everyone, but also we were allowed to see a Black Christ, or a Jewish Christ, or a Spanish Christ, or an Ethiopian Christ, or we were allowed to see different men on the cross of different cultures. And that was really radical and inclusive. But now, more recently, there's been the incredible experience of putting a female Christ on the cross. And I have found that shocking, but very important, because of course the concept of Messiah is really about, in the Christian tradition, is really about God incarnate, and it has to be equally amongst all. And so, and the Christ on the cross is, when seen through certainly a mystical lens, is also the redeemed Christ. It's the resurrected Christ, which is all of Christos. And so there has to be male and female. But I'm part of this project. I'm writing one chapter in this book of many people writing on QIST, and it is having a deep impact on me, just contemplating the image, because it's not just words, it's not just stories and voices and peopled with women, but it's also these symbols, these extraordinary symbols that we have that have been only male. And it hadn't occurred to me that it would be even possible, that it wouldn't be blasphemous to put a female on a cross. What do you think of that?
It's so funny. I'm reading in preparation for my class this week, an interreligious course on hermeneutics, and Jerusha Tanner Lamptey, her second book, and even though I was rereading it today, I'm gonna not remember the name of it, but she was talking about what we call like cross-textual analysis. And in particular, she was using Maharista, womanist, the Chinese, I should remember her name because the other professor actually introduced her. But anyway, how these women were grappling with the notion of the Christ and the way in which, like, how do you get this reflection of women's, realities? And I think your project is probably going to be one of the ways that's really, I mean, the thing is that we have to challenge ourselves with regard to the boundaries that we create almost falsely around us, because I'm always talking about getting God out of the box. And every time I find myself in the corner, I realize that, I'm creating a box, because if I think that, with all this creationism, this capacity to create from nothing and all that stuff, that somehow, I'm in a corner, it means I'm in a corner because I don't believe that I can be freed by the one who created me, right? So it means that I'm challenging doubts that I face with regard to my relationship with the divine, and somehow that I'm going to like overthink the divine, I'm going to like go outside the boundaries of the divine or something. So I think I really resonate with the challenge that it presents when you're like, it didn't occur to me. I mean, I didn't mention that my father, was a Methodist minister, and that's why I was given the name Mary, after the mother of Jesus. So when I became Muslim, I took Amina after the mother of Muhammad, upon the two of them be peace. But because my father introduced me to the God of love, I actually had no problem with the male gods, because I was always presented with the loving God. That's why I took my last name, which means wadud, But I was also very curious about different religions. And, even I was a Buddhist before I was a Muslim. I joined an ashram and learned meditation that I still practice, I identify as an eclectic Muslim, so I have all this stuff, But I think the thing that was interesting about it for me is that whenever I do feel pushed into the corner in terms of my conceptualization, I realize that that's my mind creating a limit to that which is in fact unlimited. And that when I learn to gently birth this new Krista, for example, right? When I learn to birth it, the end result is that I will be enriched, because the thing that I'm resisting is that sort of programming, even if it's done in a loving, and comforting way. How do we expand ourselves, except that we get up against those walls, we realize I can't go anywhere if I keep trying to go this way. Maybe I should go, as they say with the breath, I should go deep into the breath and just let it unfold and trust, see what happens.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting also you talk about these different religions, because of course there's been exchanges across trade routes and in translation schools, since the beginning of time, really. And I've certainly had, I see myself in a Judeo-Christian culture. I mean, I was brought up in a Jewish area of North London, so and my mother's side, I later discovered has got a big Jewish line that gets sort of lost in Poland and Russia. So and my biggest teacher was Zev Ben Shimon Halevi, who I've studied with for 30 years, and I teach in his school. And one of the big things he had was this sort of ladder that was so helpful to me to begin to make sense of things, and start to be able to see it in Jewish and Christian mysticism, like Cordovera and Teresa of Avila, things like that. But one of the things on this ladder, there's a central column with all these stages. I won't go into it, but there's one place in it called the Bat Kol, which is the daughter of the voice. And it's always been somewhere that I've just sort of stared at for ages, waiting for something to come through, looking at. And for me, that's been the womb place, the veil, the unveiling place. Sometimes when my friends who are rabbis, because I studied at a place called Leo Beck for quite a while, they on New Year's Day, they'd play the shofar, and I always feel that it's got that sense. And I've been reading the Zohar recently for my project on the womb, and there's this beautiful text about tefillin that really talks about the place of womb and the sound of the shofar opening. And I feel that these mystical texts, this sort of mapping that people have done for centuries, really help me listen and get out of this intellectual boxing that I've been born into, and sort of feeling like I have to have some kind of patriarchic, academic, proof-ridden view of anything that I'm going to write or participate in. And I feel that allowing other traditions to come in, I'm looking at the Buddhist idea of void at the moment when I'm trying to look at that, allowing it kind of opens my mind to what these words or these terms or these maps or these images or icons, they're there to sort of help us step through a gateway. They're not a dogmatic thing for us to just sort of take and be a sort of slave to. They're openings, aren't they? They're pointing to something that's very real and very present.
And we have the opportunity to experience it. you know, I mean, but it is a question of trust. I mean, to trust that, you know, as they say that, you know, if you step off the cliff, either you will find a platform or you will grow wings, you know, and you'll fly, you know. And I love that image because, you know, sometimes I can get like just so, I'm just so much in need for things to just sort of work out in my head. I'm like really over cerebral. And at the same time, sometimes I can see that I'm just knocking my head against the wall. So I just need to open my heart and trust.
How do you do that? I mean, how do you do that in your own prayer practice? Because do you find, I mean, you mentioned before so vividly about prayers and naming of God, but it's, of course, that's all in the liturgy that we use as well. You know, the Psalms, there's always he and everything that you, how do you do that in your own personal prayer practice, and how does that affect you?
Yeah, I belong to a Sufi or mystical tradition that practices meditation. And even though I've been with my teacher, you know, for more than 20 years, and, you know, we're supposed to, you know, meditate twice a day, you know, before or after the morning prayer, before or after the sunset prayer. He never like kind of told us what to do. So, you know, I didn't quite really know what I was doing when I was there. And when I was in the Buddhist ashram, they didn't tell me either, you know. So I started going to the Vipassana 10-day silent meditation retreats, and they actually teach you what to do. And it was so interesting because they would teach you using your own breath how to disattach, you know, like to not have desire, to not have aversion. And I have, you know, old age, arthritis and scoliosis. So I have this pain in my knee. And when I would sit with my knee, I was just like always be concentrating on the pain. And I'm like, oh, I hate this pain, you know. And eventually I got deeply enough into the practice that I still have chronic pain, but I can observe it without, you know. And so it's this thing about observing. Sometimes when I am the most upset, or even the most excited, for me to practice that unattached kind of breathing and observation, just observing, allows me to see that, you know, it doesn't rest in my head, even though it's like, you know, I'm overactive, right? So it is just being with myself, but not trying to direct myself. And therefore, I become a better conduit for, you know, whatever is out there. And it, you know, teaches me to trust, because at least for that, you know, 20, 40, you know, 1 hour, and, you know, when I do the retreats, 10 hours, you know, at least for those moments that I'm sitting there, I am safe. And so the only thing that will be in between me and this experience with Ar-Rahman, with the most sacred, the most merciful, is my preoccupation. So I can let that go, and that helps me. I embrace the sadness, I embrace the joy, and I embrace them equally because they're just a part of the unfolding. That's been really helpful in terms of, you know, I mean, being raised PK, I was always in a God-conscious environment, and I never lost that in all my transformations. You know, even as a Buddhist and as a non-theist tradition, I just refer to it as the sacred. But, you know, always having that doesn't mean that I always had my own clear connection. You know, it could kind of like be out there, right? So how do I bring it back in here? And how do I make it personal? And how do I, you know, take ownership of it? And how do I trust myself as the vehicle? This is the vehicle that I was given to be on the planet at this time, to seek my purpose. And that purpose is, how do I reflect the divine reality, you know? So that, to me, that those breath exercises, you know, they really help me to come back to center.
Wonderful.
What about you?
Well,
can I, Marie Elsa, can I just, I love this beautiful flow, and I'm just going to add something into it.
Okay.
for you both to take in and be with and respond to as you wish. And I just also want to remind our friends who are I'm sure avidly listening and receiving all of this beauty, that they can send questions through to me, and if there's a moment we will weave them in. But I just wanted to add into your mix just this consideration of, and I think it is clear you are showing us actually the ways in which you are helping others in their journeys. But I just wanted to specifically direct you to, I know you're both engaged in different ways, Amna through, you know, through your students and other ways, and Marie Elsa through your work as a spiritual director, and also your work in leadership. I just wanted to sort of just ask you to consider and perhaps share with us also how you're helping others in that journey. And I think it's becoming clear to us as we're listening to you, but you know, how are you helping others also in that connecting to their inner essence, so that their voice can come through with authenticity and in being in that journey with their voice. So and then I will just step back and listen. Thank you.
Would you like me to answer Amina's question first, or would you like?
Yes, please, and then weave into this question.
Into that. Okay,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. When I was about 7 or 8, I just decided I was going to church. My current family didn't. My father, that generation, didn't. So I just literally, belligerently went off to church on my own. So it comes from somewhere in me, which is interesting. And I was very influenced by the Cistercian movement, which is a silent monastic movement. And I spent lots of retreat there. It's very near my French family in the mountains here. And I still go and spend time with the women there. And there's something about, I think there was something very cathartic for me about being in an enclosed, silent. I mean, I'm although I love people and I love talking, I'm also really a massive introvert. And there's something about being able to be in an order that really affirms that you have a vast, vast inner world, which has a structure and a life, and a way of really being involved with God was essential to me. And having prayer space 5 times a day and 1 in the night with women's voices, and the Cistercian movement, we sing most of our prayers. So that was very profound structure. And you can really, you know, when you're, as we all know, when you're with people who are really praying, you sort of unconsciously learn how to join the space and how to put your heart and your soul on the you know, at the foot of the altar, really, with them. But also this teacher, Zeb Ben Shimon Halevi, who I met in the 90s when I was young, was very, very strict. And he didn't just teach me Jacob's Ladder. I was with, you know, in class with him once a week, real proper study group, courses every few weeks, summer schools, and meditations once a month. And I had to meditate every day for years and years, and would go to him and give him my experiences. And then he was a real spiritual director. So I was unbelievably lucky to find him. And it was a very, very intensive training, but that doesn't prevent the intensity of life still throwing everything it has at you and making you have to absolutely learn and throw off kilter and have to come back again. So that's a bit of the answer, really. With regards to what I'm doing, I mean, when I started in the church, you know, I started at a time when women had to be led by men. They were not allowed to be just female priests. They were only female priests, only some agreed, and you had to be led by men. So you didn't have a full voice. And I was asked to cut my hair short, wear a trouser suit, and I wasn't allowed to sing the gospel because I didn't have masculine tones that gave the authority of God's voice. And I had to sit in rooms full of people who believed that I was of the dark side because I was a woman, or were looking for witchy ideas. So I had to keep my, actually a lot of my studies with Halevi, who studied a line of Cordovero Kabbalah, not Lurianic Kabbalah. I had to keep all that quite quiet. Even studying mysticism, Christian mysticism, I had to keep all that very quiet. And I think coming into that and just standing up, even in my ordination, I was asked to dress like that, and I couldn't. I wasn't as strong as the first line of women who did do that. And I saw a lot of them burn out quite seriously, and I didn't have that kind of strength. I also, for my own soul journey, needed to reclaim and keep hold of my femininity. That's just part of my journey very much. So I had to think about what image would help me be able to, and I thought of the suffragettes because that was in their collective. So I put my hair in a bun. My great auntie Margaret and I went shopping in Newcastle. We got some black material and we made me a long skirt. We found a black waistcoat in the Oxfam, and I turned up in a long skirted suffragette suit, basically. And you could see the fury at the beginning. And I think that's when you pioneer, you do have to understand that change brings out fury, envy, anger, all of those things, as well as relief, freedom, joy. You know, there's all of that that comes out at you. But what was so interesting was that I could see even Bishop Chartres at that time, and then sort of recognize something that was okay. Suffragettes had been women who'd had a voice that was sort of acceptable, and it worked for me for years there. So that's something of what I've been doing, just sort of standing up. But you know, women are now allowed to be bishops, and you don't officially have to be led by a man, but there's so much work to do. And I do feel that, you know, the women who are now in Iran, who are talking, you know, standing up about, you know, how you wear your own spiritual clothing, and what a collective idea of that is. I do feel that there's still an awful lot of that globally everywhere. And I don't feel a sort of separate culture, really. I just feel that's a big part of the same battle that's going on. Partly answers your question.
Yeah, in that preparation for my class this week, the objective of Dr. Jerusha in that book is to encourage Muslim theologians and Islamic feminist theologians to engage with, you know, especially women, feminist and Christian liberation thinkers as a way to transform in you know, the work that they do. And one of the things that I found particularly interesting was reading about, oh, I had a senior moment now. I corrected myself and now I can't get myself back on track.
You were talking about...
no, I was thinking about something that you were saying about, oh, I know what it was. So the idea of the Christ as a leader is a very patriarchal construction of leader. And I'm still pushing back about the term leader. I get that, you know, applied to me, but until I can strip it of so much hegemonic, patriarchal, binary baggage, I'm very uncomfortable with it. But they were talking about, you know, the Christ of service. And I, you know, again, I mean, you know, PK, preacher's kid, my father was a Protestant, so I was raised on the Protestant ethic. So I definitely think about service, you know, yeah, I mean, the Arabic of it is whoever works is successful, you know, and I have had a life of service, not only because I am the mother of 5 children and I spent most of the years with them and I'm still, you know, a single parent, but also in terms of community, because I started off as elementary school teacher and then I went and got a couple of degrees and went and started teaching older people. And, you know, I teach, you know, in activist circles and intensive courses and all that kind of stuff. So I think the best way that I can answer, you know, the question that you were asking, Fatima, is, you know, thinking about, you know, this inspiration of thinking about Christ as a servant leader and not as a hegemonic sort of Roman leader that was the sort of challenge, the rubric of understanding leadership that they were discussing in their feminist Christian theological works. I think that the role of service is the role that allows me to demonstrate, like, you know, to embody the ethics that I believe in, the ethics of care. You know, how do you care for other people? How do you hold space for other people? How do you hold space for the planet Earth, for the environment, for all creatures great and small? And because we are one human family on, at the moment, the only planet that we know that is inhabited, this one, Earth, there is always something to be done. You know, I mean, there's a hadith about, you know, the blessings for the one who removes the stone from the path, you know, of another who walks. So images of amal, you know, of work, especially good works, amal salihah, good works, are all over the Quran. It's all over, you know, the prophets, you know, exemplary behavior. And I think that I'm trying to retire. I had a birthday last month and I turned 70. It's like, this is a big number. And I've been Muslim for 50 years. So I chose something 50 years ago. I was an adult, I was 20, and I've been working at it, you know, and so I'm trying to transform it. But actually, it's really easy to feel for others and the earth, and then to find something to do. You know, like, you know, I was just sitting out because I had to mix it with planes. I don't want to remember it in too many detail, but, you know, I was sitting, you know, outside, you know, for a bit, and a woman was cleaning in this area. And she said to me, you know, how is it that they would just like throw their trash, their cups and all that kind of stuff? They would just leave it here and like not 2 meters or 2 yards, there's a trash bin. I just love that this woman thought to say this to me like a stranger. And, you know, I also love that I had enough of the language that I could understand her. You know, I didn't have enough language to respond back because, of course, as a mother of 5 children, I kind of know why it is they don't make it through the bend. But I just thought it was so interesting because there she is, she's doing her job, probably, you know, like really minimal salary, right? But she's serving people who have forgotten that they are a part of humanity, and that taking care of the earth, keeping things, you know, clean, we all have a responsibility for that. So there's always work to be done. And that's one of the reasons why, while I'm trying to make a transition to truly be retired, I'm not really sure how it's going to be.
I think you bring up a really important thing, because another thing that's hidden in plain sight really is the voice of the earth, isn't it? And we're only just beginning to realize that we are part of nature. We're not shepherds or great sacred custodians or anything. We are actually part of the earth, and the earth is really speaking to us very loudly, and it's still being completely dismissed, rather like the history of women's voices. It's so difficult to see that. I mean, I'm in Provence at the moment, where we make most of our living from lavender, and this last year all the lavender died because of the droughts, massive droughts. So all of the farmers lost all of their income, and there was no scent in the air. The bees lost, the honey is lost. I mean, all of this whole ecosystem has gone because the whole area has been built on lavender for generations. So it's a really big, and the scent and the color and the healing and the taste of lavender is a big part of her voice, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Quran points us to, you know, the signs, ayat, signs in ourselves, signs in the earth. And I think about people who are like carelessly unaware, you know, like we're at a critical point with regard to our home, you know, the earth, and there are people who are like critically unaware. It's just like a sort of, you know, I don't have to think about it. I don't care about it. What difference does it make? And yet, you know, Native Americans, they have this notion that you don't throw something out in the earth that is not biodegradable because, you know, within 7 generations, because they think in generations. They came from generations of their ancestors and they think forward towards their generations. So one of the ways they do that is through the earth, you know, so that we have to, like you say, you know, it's not something that we're just stewards of. We are earth. That's, you know,
from there
that's it. That's all we've got. That's right, you know. But there is that careless, you know, there's that careless unawareness, which is, you know, something I'm concerned with, even if I cannot find the solution. I like to think solution-wise about things. I don't like to find despair. I don't know what the solution is. Do you have any thoughts on solutions?
Well, I think a big awareness of that our bodies are sacred and that the earth is sacred has to. I think it has to. I think it does have to come on all levels, but there's a lot to be said for the kind of concept of God, the essential philosophies to have a big shift where we get to be the beloved, we get to be in the divine marriage, and we realize that the earth is, you know, the marriage feast, it's the wedding feast, and we're just here to be part of that celebration, if we can see it in that way. And I think those images, people are longing for them, and they, you know, I even think the whole part of the gender movement is about people wanting to come out of very oppressive dogma, but they're still hunting for deep spirituality and a sort of creativity to it. Just as you were saying, you know, the sort of patriarchal way of understanding. I had a wonderful talk with a woman called Margaret Barker. I don't know if you've heard of her. She's done an awful lot on the theology of the first temple back in sort of early Judaism, and her understanding of early Christianity is that it was really rebellion trying to bring back the first temple worship. And she was really talking to me because I was trying to talk to her about my project, how to write this thing up on the QIST, because I've done, as you often do, too much research. And she said, don't write in a patriarchal way where you have your idea and use things to back them up. Work from beyond the veil and listen to the creativity of the weave and let it come through and write it on the page in that way. Then the energy of what you say will actually be helpful as well as the words.
Thank you for that advice.
Amazing.
Yes, that is amazing advice. And we are, you know, in a way, I don't want to pause this because there is a flow and there is a weave and there is so much coming through. And you know, we always say that there is just never enough time, and you know, we are in that position. But what I really deep gratitude to you both for this flow and for being with it and translating it for us. We've only got 8 minutes left, but I just wanted to hear from, I thought what we could do is we could hear, there are several questions actually that have mounted because you're stimulating everybody so much, but I'm going to invite 2 people to share their questions. And then in the remaining time that we have, I would just ask that you speak to whichever part of it feels right for you. And we'll hear once from both of you. And any other closing remarks, and then we'll, God willing, bring it to a temporary close, but of course the flow will continue. And I thought maybe we would take a question from Jill Hammer, who is here. And I'm just going in, and I'm going in order of the questions coming in, just to be in fairness, and also from Claire Higgins. So if Jill, if you could unmute yourself first, and I think Simon's going to help with that. And if you could share your question, if directly after that, Claire will unmute you, Claire Higgins, and if you could share your question, and then Marie Elsa and Amina will respond as they feel right. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you for this amazing conference. My question for the panelists is, are there particular moments, times in your life when you felt some larger voice come through you? Are there particular moments where there was a sense that something had come through that was bigger than you? And I'm curious about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Claire?
Okay, my question is anything lost in translating the experience of feminine presence into words? And I ask that, I'm sorry, I ask that from a psychological perspective. When we're talking, when we're formulating words, it can activate certain parts of the brain, the intellectual brain. So how do you hold on to that more feminine form of expression?
Oh, I love both those questions.
You get to go first.
Really?
I said you get to go first.
Oh, they're wonderful. Gosh, Jill, I love your work on Sefi at Sira. It's just, you know, beautiful. Absolutely. I find that I'm continually integrating spiritual experiences. When I was younger, they used to be a bit overbearing sometimes. And I've learned that that the integration is you know, you have to grow up. Light shows the darkness as well. You know, that the way that Amina talked so beautifully about, it changes the boundaries, the concept of just how the world is at all, which having profound companions alongside that is unbelievably important, but not always there. And so I think that also has brought out that very devotional side of me, where I sometimes, you know, we go through life where you have a bit of a dark night of the soul, and probably because you've had such a big experience, or because it feels like there's nothing, and then you go through the dark night and you get a big experience, but I still you know, need to ask that I have help somehow with the divine to integrate it and become, you know, more in the image of God, more who I really am designed to be, and be of more service. I think the more experience I have, the more it has to be dedicated. That for me, that seems to be the dynamic of how it works. There's so much more I could say about that. We don't have much time. I'd love to talk to you about that in more detail. The other thing about the voice, which Claire, I wonder if you're the author of that. Anyway, Claire was talking about, which I think, it feels to me that what you're talking about is the divine feminine as the poetic. And what I do, like for instance, the last 2 theological projects I've done, which is just a chapter in a compilation of feminist theologians, I've actually done art before I could even think, before I even found words. And I've ended up putting the art into my chapters because I needed to have that wordless place where I would, because it's real what we're thinking about, then I would place myself in front of it and be in relationship with it and see what comes through. And actually using charcoal and wax has really been very, very helpful for me. And reading also sometimes poetry, sacred poetry, that allows me to not just have that, feel the devotion of someone else, but really good sacred poetry has the space between the words, the white space on the page that really helps me absorb. We were talking about the womb earlier on, and the womb for me is a place that is gestative and full, and always kind of calling you into growth. So that white space on the page is always, it's a kind of like sitting in front of a fire, and watching or absorbing the heat. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, I'm currently teaching in an Indonesian university, and I have enough market Indonesian to get me around, but not enough to teach a class. And I'm teaching hermeneutics. So I'm teaching about language and expressions and limitations that go with it, especially working between the three languages of English, Arabic, and Bahasa right now. I definitely think that things do get lost in translation, and I was trying to explain it to my students that if you ever, first of all, I don't do translation because I think it's a thankless task, because I always think in nuance. But if you're learning, you look in a dictionary to see what a word means that you're learning in another language. There's a whole page or half a page of meaning, but when you translate, you got to pluck one of those items out. So how do you keep it within a sort of epistemological field? That's like, one of the reasons why some words I only use in Arabic, because I don't want to lose that, So I think it's a very slippery slope, but I'm fascinated by the need to transverse the spaces that can be arbitrarily constructed around that, including how we think about the language of God. Because some people, because Arabic is the language of the Qur'an, they believe that, that Allah speaks Arabic. And I said, no, Allah is multilingual. So tongue in cheek, I will tell you the example that I gave in my closing lecture when I had a one-year visitorship at Harvard Divinity School. And I said, if you had the choice between a really good orgasm and a really good conversation about one, which one would you take? You don't have to give me an answer. But there are some things that the experience of it really exceeds the languages that you're using in order to express it. Like the
I imagine there are many universities that use that as an example.
I did it right in the divinity school. As far as Jill's question, also nice to see you. I was a little in a crazy space, like in terms of not being home yesterday, so I didn't get to log in when I intended to also see you there. My 50-year high school reunion was supposed to happen when the pandemic began, so they kind of postponed it, and they had it, but of course I couldn't get back to the US, so I sent them a little video scope, and it occurred to me at that time that I literally integrated my high school class. Like I was brought in from, whatever, because of, intellect, but to a school that was all white in a town that was mostly all white, and they were trying to do the liberal thing, So I realized, I came in as the sort of like, what do you call it, like the poster child of poverty or something like that, in this really wealthy town, and I thought, well, how do I tell them? I had a 90-second clip, how do I tell them what happened? And I thought about, going into a zone that was totally unknown to me, with all the things unknown to me, not anything from my family or anything available for me, because I went from Washington, D.C. to this place in Massachusetts, And then I realized that became the shape of my life. That I love going into places that are new to me. I've visited 60 countries, I've lived in 6, and all of a sudden you realize that how traumatic it will be at 14 to do something like this, instead turned into the mystery and wonder of life. And it also made me reflect on how many things in my life have exceeded any projection that I could have made where that thing would go. Mm-hmm. So I have so much gratitude about experiences that have come to me, the ones that I've sought and the ones that I didn't seek, and it was so much greater than what I could have sought at that time, that, like, Marie Elsa, it's an amazing question that, would love to have a conversation just around that. Thank you for asking, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank
Well, just before we come to an end, could I just add one quick thing? Because I
Yes.
like to thank you, Fatima, because I feel that you've sort of embodied the subject by having a strong but very feminine method of bringing us together with real conversation. I know you've chosen this theme, but your very method of bringing out the subjects between us has really been a good example of a real kind of strong feminine. So I'd like to thank you for holding the space in that way.
Thank you both so much. Words are not enough, really. You've both been a part of my journey personally for the years, and I know Simon's too. And I'm sure many people right around the world have been inspired and guided by you both. And there were a lot of questions coming through, and I'm sorry we didn't get time for them all, but I feel like there was such a flow here. There is, so grateful. Thank you both. Thank you to our participants as well for being here, for their questions, for their receptivity. And yeah, may it all be soaked up into our physical cells and into our various bodies, and may we know the fruits of it within ourselves, and may we breathe it out as a prayer into the world